RSAC Conference 2025 is in full swing, with cybersecurity experts from all over the world descending on San Francisco to share trends, data, and announcements.
This year, IT Pro has been providing coverage throughout the event, across talks on topics such as AI security and threat actor methodology.
What has been said so far at RSAC, and what are some of the key emerging trends identified? You're listening to the IT Pro podcast. Hi, I'm Jane McCallion.
And I'm Rory Bathgate.
And today I'll be speaking to you, Rory, about some of your RSAC coverage and key topics that you've picked out. So first of all, let's talk about AI. Unsurprisingly, I think, to everybody, generative AI aside, if you have ever tuned into anything that's happened at RSA Conference or RSAC Conference as it is now, security people love to talk about AI and its role in security. So what has been the chatter this week?
Yeah, so in my pre-conference piece, I said AI agents and how AI is being used both for attacks and for defense are likely to dominate the conference. This wasn't a prophetic moment on my part. As you've said, this is something that's talked about every year. And of course, the last few years have seen generative AI and other trends surrounding it dominate discussions at conferences. In the opening keynote, we had a few interesting talks on AI and security. So, for example, we heard from Jitu Patel, EVP and Chief Product Officer at Cisco. We also heard from Sandra Joyce, VP Google Threat Intelligence at Google Cloud. And we also heard from Vasu Jakal, who's Corporate VP for Microsoft Security. And all of them talked about AI in security. So, for example, Jakal painted this quite vivid picture of a not too distant future in which organizations have to handle a whole fleet of AI agents at their disposal. And this is just going to massively increase complexity, is what Jakal was saying. So she's not the first to suggest this. Funnily enough, a lot of AI developers are suggesting this, but they're basically saying AI will be necessary in order to keep up with the complexity introduced by AI. It's kind of a snake eating its own tail situation here where, the more you want to use AI in your organization, the more complex things are going to become, and you need that autonomous help to keep up with the threats that it's introducing potentially, or the risks, maybe I should say, that it's introducing. This is something it's been talked about a bit more in day 2 as well. So we had a panel on AI safety, which we'll talk about in a bit more detail in a bit. But some of the speakers at that panel highlighted that as we get, say, fleets of AI agents, so these are very specialized models that maybe just do one task autonomously in the background so that you don't have to, you obviously need observability of those fleets, but you will also need dedicated benchmarks for assessing the risk of any given fleet. And you'll need potentially AI help in achieving that. So it's a very complicated picture. There's a lot to dive into there, but there's clearly a lot of excitement around AI, but potentially more cynicism than I was expecting going into this.
Really?
They're playing to, RSAC, you're playing to a cynical crowd. Security professionals are not going to kind of see this as a silver bullet. They know that this makes things more complicated, even if it's bringing some benefits with it. But definitely from the speakers, there's been a lot more focus on you can't just implement this. You have to implement this right than I was maybe expecting.
What are the concerns then? Is it sort of a poison pill type situation? You introduce some kind of, not even necessarily like ransomware or anything like that, just some kind of incorrect information that makes your agent behave in a way that it shouldn't, whether that's inadvertently or on purpose.
Yes, so hallucinations are still a big concern. I mean, I've had some conversations over the last few years that have suggested that maybe customers aren't as concerned about them anymore, but from a security perspective, they're clearly still an issue. For those who don't know, this is referring specifically to when AI models act in a way that you weren't expecting, or they're giving you confidently incorrect outputs. That's obviously a problem because it undermines anything that the models are being used for, but it can also be abused by threat actors. If a model is unreliable or unpredictable, then it could potentially be jailbroken or made to act in a way that is counter to its guidelines and its guardrails. So that talk I mentioned by Patel at Cisco, he warned of some of the dangers of fine-tuning AI models, for example. Cisco has apparently found that when you fine-tune AI models, it can actually increase the risk of the models themselves. So Cisco research found that tailoring models, say, to your unique organizational style data can make them 3 times more susceptible to jailbreaks and up to 22 times more likely to output harmful responses. So, we've heard a lot about fine-tuning AI models and grounding them in data over the past year and a half, 2 years, right? Not just using them off the shelf, but making them really work for your business. But it seems that comes with its own major security drawbacks that people are going to have to anticipate. And then, of course, even with off-the-shelf models, there's been a lot of discussion around, how easy is it to actually identify how likely these things are to go off the rails and act in a way that you don't want, whether that's leaking data or just exposing your customers to maybe harmful outputs, unwanted outputs. There was a talk specifically on AI safety. And John Flynn, also known as For sometimes, who's VP of Security and Privacy at Google DeepMind, gave quite a practical example where he said that AI developers come up with benchmarks for risk and for safety, but the real world use always looks a bit different to the benchmarks. You'll benchmark it, you'll figure out, okay, it has a proclivity to go wrong when this happens, so we can fix that. And you can make it all very neat on synthetic data. But then when you actually implement the thing, you're always going to find that it does things that you weren't expecting. So he and the whole panel that he was on basically came to the agreement that security teams need to keep an eye on models constantly. You constantly need to come up with adaptive, dynamic policies for dealing with AI models because they are not static.
Yeah, this is the classic, does your thing, whatever it is, survive contact with reality? Because many, many, many prototypes are made and tests are done of software, of projects, of whatever, and then they come up against reality and they don't always survive that or behave in the way that is expected.
Absolutely. And I think, this goes both ways as well. AI is, on the one hand, maybe not as simple to use for defenders. And there's, like I said, there's been a lot of discussion around the most effective ways to use it for detecting threats. And even if you have a really reliable AI model, keeping an eye on it to make sure it's doing what you want it to do. But there's also been some discussion around how we're maybe not seeing threat actors using AI to the extent that we thought we would, and how, most threat actors are still largely using it for quite simple tasks.
Well, like maybe making your English a bit better or making something a bit more targeted.
Yeah, so targeted phishing attacks are definitely a concern. So Sandra Joyce from Google's threat intelligence team gave the example of this advanced persistent threat group called APT42. That's how it's tracked. It's based in Iran, and how Google has seen this group using Gemini to translate text into colloquial English. So they're trying to make messages seem more informal, more breezy, more personable than they would be able to using a standard translation software. It's things like this. It's things like researching potential targets. So there was also the example given of groups that were maybe looking to target a specific country using Gemini or similar tools to just aggregate data on how that country's military systems work. Anything that's even publicly accessible, just using these AI tools to draw it all together in one place and to draw it all together in a specific context. A lot of these models have, again, guardrails that prevent them from explicitly acting in a malicious way. So you can jailbreak them, but it's easier for threat actors to just use them in a sort of a gray way to pull together information that could help a threat actor to launch an attack, but not to be writing malware with AI tools.
Yeah, so the kind of, tell me about Jay Smith, CTO, and their interests outside of work, or kind of where they go each year for whatever. So you can get to speed up research, like we say. Assuming, of course, that the output is correct, but that's another discussion for another day.
Exactly. These public AI models are just limited in what they can achieve for threat actors. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't find ways around it. Like I said, you can jailbreak models. Cisco, that research I mentioned earlier, shows that models are maybe more liable to be jailbroken if they've been customized for a specific company. But equally, threat actors are potentially beginning to use open source models that they're running on premise somewhere to launch attacks. So this is something that Flynn at Google DeepMind that I mentioned posited in that panel discussion. He said that it was quite likely that we would see more tailored attacks in the coming year. He said that he, again, acknowledged that while, say, polymorphic malware isn't being written with AI, and he doesn't know if it will, that doesn't mean that it won't. And certainly with threat actors able to customize open source models to a greater extent, and with some models, they didn't say DeepSeek, but I'm just going to use DeepSeek as an example. This is entirely theoretical. With a model like DeepSeek, which can be run on lighter hardware, it can be inferenced on less powerful chips. And certainly Google, Microsoft are releasing smaller models that can also be run on lighter chips, as we discussed on the podcast the other week. That gives potentially threat actors an easier way of running local models that can be tailored for maybe producing malware, maybe just producing these phishing messages and similar at scale. And actually, that's a specific thing that Flynn said AI had become incredibly good at, is writing code. Especially in the last year, you've seen a huge jump in all models. All of the various companies' frontier models have become a lot better at writing code. So it's potentially a small leap from writing code really well to writing malicious code really well.
Yeah, I guess that, cyber criminals, as much as anybody else, we talk about them being run as if they were a legitimate business. Well, that certainly was, a theme of last year and the year before, and actually for a long time before that as well. There's got to be a level of ROI involved. So if it's worth their while, I can imagine them using it. But clearly for now it's not, so they're not.
That's it. Yeah. It's just whatever is the easiest thing to use. If it's a massive, the audience might well have been in a situation before where you think, oh, I can use a spreadsheet for this, or I can set up this tool and it will make my life easier because it will automate this aspect of my life. And then you spend an hour trying to set the thing up. And at some point you think, this is just wasting more time than just manually doing the process.
Yes.
And the same goes for threat actors. They are looking for the path of least resistance always. Even some of the most sophisticated threat actors, that doesn't mean that they are looking to invest a massive amount of time and money into using AI for cyber attacks.
So what else was discussed at RSAC this week?
So it's not just AI. We've also had a panel on cryptography in the face of quantum, and also some discussion on crypto. This isn't new territory. We were having a discussion earlier and saying, that quantum cryptography has been a point of discussion at RSA for many years. It's one of those situations where you have to prepare for it, even though it might be very far in the future, and you really can't easily predict when a working quantum computer is going to become an actual threat. So we heard from the likes of Whitfield Diffie, who's one of the pioneers of public key encryption, essentially saying that you've just got to create these algorithms and these standards, as NIST is in the US, to anticipate the massive change that quantum encryption will bring. So for those who don't know, in short, once you have a quantum computer that works, everything that we currently think of as encrypted will potentially be accessible, because a quantum computer could easily break down the encryption algorithms that we use. When exactly this is going to happen? Again, this conversation happens every year. So it's just like a bell that's constantly ringing somewhere in the mind of cybersecurity professionals. We had one of the panelists mentioned that he has a $2,040 bet on there being a quantum computer by 2040 with some of his colleagues, which he considers a high risk bet, which goes to show that the degree of uncertainty around will it be in the next few years, will it be in the next 15 years, is still very, very high among cybersecurity professionals.
I think today is one of these days where it's a shame that this is not a video podcast because I'm pulling all sorts of faces. So yeah, when we were speaking earlier, I said that it's been 10 years since I last went to RSA Conference, as it was at the time. And we were talking about, oh, no, you've got to be careful because malicious actors, they're collecting all your data and they're just doing it until something comes along that can break encryption. And I was reading earlier Scott Becker's piece on IT Pro about this. And I was just like, wow, it's like a Back to the Future. We have moved on not at all in 10 years. And the reality is, I am not an illustrious cybersecurity professional like Whitfield Diffie or any of the other members of that panel. However, for this to happen, you need to have mass market quantum computers. And ultimately, quantum computers, they could do slightly different things as well. So we're not just talking about having the technology that can do it, not in theory, but practically having a quantum computer that can do this. It can just break all encryption. In order for that to become really meaningful for most people, because that would probably first happen at a sort of nation state level, even if it was like worked out in a university, suddenly the men in dark suits and dark sunglasses would appear and take away your research. I'm on a bit of a soapbox here. I just think that this is so far in the future, if it happens at all, because for quantum computers to become a mass market item, they need to be more useful than computers that we have that operate just in a normal binary fashion. So it is probably the piece of RSAC and just the piece of sort of security chat generally that winds me up the most. Quantum for encryption is quite interesting, using things like superposition, like quantum entanglement, all of this kind of thing. That's super interesting. Quantum for decrypting encrypted files that use binary is just, at a mass scale, this whole kind of like, it's worthless, everything is worthless. I don't know, man. I just don't think it's going to happen. That's it. That's my rant.
This is our annual quantum rant. I mean,
I can be found on all social... Well, I can be found on LinkedIn and Blue Sky. If you disagree with me, feel free to come and give me what for. But that's my feelings on the matter.
Let's get the comment thread started right now on
Indeed.
LinkedIn. Yeah. I think this was reflected in the panel as well. It's their job to say, yes, prepare for this. They can't say, it's never going to happen, so just don't get the algorithms ready. But equally, Adi Shamir, who's a professor at the Weizmann Institute, on the panel said that he's been coming to RSA for more than a decade, and he ahead of time checked this year to see how many papers presented at RSAC mention AI or machine learning, and it was around a quarter of all papers. And then he checked how many papers were talking about quantum computers, and he couldn't find any. And both, he was saying 15 years ago, equally hot topics. So it just goes to show kind of, it's a point of discussion. It kind of has to be, but it's not, it's not got a spotlight on it at RSAC. And again, I come back to that bet that Vinod Vaikuntanathan mentioned, that $2,040 bet being high risk. I don't know if he means he's going to lose all that money if it's beforehand, or if he means that he's going to lose all that money because there won't possibly be one by 2040. And he wouldn't be able to tell you either, I don't think, because no one can say. So it's just, the wheel keeps turning.
So we've talked about AI, we've talked about quantum, reluctantly. Has there been anything more kind of down to earth, mundane, actual stuff that's really happening as we speak?
Yeah, so we had a briefing by John Fokker, who is head of threat intelligence at Trellix, exploring some practical data on threat actors and drawing on his own experience as an officer in the Dutch National High-Tech crime unit. So he opened his talk by showing some footage that he shot of a raid on a CTB ransomware group hideout with threat actors inside. So he was really kind of trying to sell the message that threat actors are ultimately just people. And that if you think of them as mysterious groups, faceless entities that can pull out these attacks, then they seem more nerve-wracking and ominous. But they are ultimately people, whether they can be extradited or not. You can target them like that. So he was going through some leaked Telegram channels that were linked to the Black Basta group. Trellix dubbed this the Panama Papers of ransomware, just because of the level of detail that they were able to see, and some of the conversations they were able to see that Black Basta members had last year. And he specifically zeroed in on a threat actor who's the leader of Black Basta called Oleg. And his point here was mainly to show, look, these threat groups have HQs. Black Basta has an HQ building. It has an HR department. They've got a cafeteria. It's on floors 1 and 3. All the data that they had drawn together here to say, if you know what you're looking for and if you work with law enforcement, there are practical ways to take down these cyber groups rather than just prevent them from attacking you. So Oleg had almost been arrested when he went on holiday to Armenia. Trellix has strong suspicions that he was able to evade capture because he pulled on some contacts, some government contacts, to sneak him basically away from law enforcement in the country, which is another element of threat groups that FOC are focused on, that those close nation-state ties, particularly in Russia, in Iran, in China, and also in North Korea, where there is that blurring of the lines between threat groups and government support. But all of this is to say, amidst everything we're hearing about threat actors using AI and threat actors focusing on new methodologies, the number one thing is still profit-driven groups they're people, they have Discords, they have Telegram channels, they message each other, they make major mistakes. This is something he was talking about. Black Basta attacked a US healthcare provider. It bit off way more than it could chew. It, in fact, bit off so much that it encrypted so much data, it couldn't decrypt it. So it completely lost its leverage with the extortion angle of, if you pay us, we'll decrypt your data. And it just goes to show that cybersecurity professionals have more tools at their disposal than just this cat and mouse game that you often hear about. There are channels through which groups can be taken down, particularly when you have international law enforcement working together.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for today, but you can catch up on everything that was said at RSAC, both what we've discussed in this podcast and more, via the link in the show notes.
As always, you can find links to all of the topics we've spoken about today in the show notes, and even more on our website at itpro.com.
You can also follow us on LinkedIn, as well as subscribe to our daily newsletter. Don't forget to subscribe to the IT Pro podcast wherever you find podcasts, and if you're enjoying the show, let us know by leaving a rating and a review.
We'll be back next week with more from the world of IT, but until then, goodbye.
Bye.